INXS, the wonderful INXS. Michael Hutchence may have died at only 37, but his fans are legion. INXS were at one point the biggest band in the world. Michael's big sister, Tina, adored him from the start and has written an intimate and detailed telling of her brother's story. From faltering teenager to rock god. It's all in the book, My Brother, Lost Boy of INXS. It's by Tina Hutchence. I am delighted to welcome live on the line from somewhere, I believe, on the west coast of America, Tina Hutchence. Tina, good morning to you.
Good morning, Giles. So nice to speak with you.
Indeed. So lovely to speak to you at last. We had some fun and games earlier on in the week, didn't we, to get you on this show?
Yeah.
It was quite something.
Well, it was exasperating, actually.
We're here now. Now, if anybody who was anybody in the 80s, INXS, basically, when we spoke before a little off air, INXS were basically the soundtrack for a pretty good part of my sort of late teen, early 20s years. They filled the dance floors, but the INXS were much more than just another pop band, and Michael was much more than just another very beautiful, pretty boy lead singer.
Well, he certainly... from a shy kid, he certainly made a great frontman. He just had that magnetism, you know?
I mean, you say from a shy kid that obviously we just think of Michael Hutchence as this rock and roll figure on stage, rather than like quite a lot of leather, quite a lot of chest bearing, oozing sexuality. Obviously you were his older sister. Tell me a little bit about sort of your background, his background, and how you became a confidant.
Well, of course, I had just turned 12 years old when Michael was born. My mother had married Kel Hutchence a year before. And they were both very busy people. My mother was actually already working as a makeup artist. She was gone 12, 14 hours a day. So when I was at school, there was a sitter there, but I came home and she handed Michael to me every day. So, and my parents had a big social life. So I just automatically grew into, his other mother. That was just the way it was. And that was the first 5 years of his life. And of course, Rhett came along. And then we went to Hong Kong to live. And I wasn't so much on tap anymore. First of all, I was 17.
Right.
I was myself. And we had... something wonderful that they have over there, a baby armor, which is a wonderful lady who takes care of children and lives with you. So, but we stayed close, of course, because we had been so close. And when I left for the United States, he was 10 and going on 11, and we just kept up. I mean, he was the one who wrote to me. It was very sweet. I have some lovely letters from that time.
I mean, did Michael? When did you think that Michael started to realize that he was going to be, a musician? Was he always, from your standpoint, was he always an artistic, a sensitive boy, as it were?
Well, always artistic in the way that he was a poet. I mean, we were already getting letters from his teachers saying, Michael's a dreamer. He can't make money. He'll never make money writing poetry.
Right.
But when he was a teenager, he actually came to the United States to live with me when he was about 15. He lived over here for about a year and a half, went to Hollywood High.
Oh, right.
And so we were together again. Then when he went back, that was when it all started, the music. But when he was here, no, he wasn't. I couldn't imagine him as a singer. He didn't talk about it. He listened to a lot of music, but he wrote poetry. But it wouldn't occur to me that, he would step out in front of people and sing. I didn't know he had a voice.
I mean, apparently he had a lisp as well when he was that correct? He had a lisp. Yeah.
He did. He always had a lisp.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. What's it like from a big sister's point of view then, when suddenly this faltering teenager, as you described him, suddenly turns into a massive rock star? I mean, at INXS, the birth of MTV, they were everywhere, and Michael was being adored and, let's be honest about this, lusted after by most of the female population of the planet.
Yeah, which was very strange to me because he was just my skinny brother, I didn't see it. I honestly didn't see it. I thought he had great hair, but it didn't, that was amazed me. The first time that I saw them in Australia, and it was more of a huge pub. And so there were a lot of guys there, throwing, well, they'd throw their beer up at him.
Right.
Like, all over him, and he kept singing, and he had some good things, good comebacks at them. But when he came over here, and they actually stayed with me because they couldn't afford a hotel, so the manager always stayed with me, Chris Murphy and his wife. So their first show was at a pub in California, where I live, and the people out there, they weren't interested at all. I mean, there was Wendy Murphy, Chris Murphy's wife, and I just jumping around saying, aren't they great, and dancing. And the guys there were just drinking. They weren't interested. But the next gig they had was the U.S. festival.
Right.
US festival, over 250,000 people.
Wow.
They killed it.
But isn't this one of the things though with the Australian bands, because they spend such, I mean, I've got friends in the music industry and also, and because it's such a long way, if you like, what it was in the 80s and 90s in terms of not being so much social media. So bands in Australia had to work and tour. So when they arrived in Europe or the US, they were rather hot, to put it mildly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's all that some years, the first couple of years, they did 300 shows in 1 year.
Yeah.
So they do have to travel in Australia. Exactly. Everything's so far and not that many people, actually. So when they decided to do overseas, it was a huge deal. And, most bands don't get to that. They just sort of live and die in Australia. So they were one of the first.
And when you saw them at the US Festival, I mean, was that if you like, did that sort of make you sit up and everybody else sit up and take notice and thought this is going to be quite something?
Yeah, well, actually, they were very lucky because the way it was set was their first single had come out, their first international single, The One Thing, and it was playing on high rotation on MTV. It had just started playing on high rotation. So they were one of the first bands up in the 2-day festival, which most people don't take that much notice of. But when they announced them and they came on stage, the audience went crazy as soon as the music started because they knew this song, and they loved their video did so well over here. But Australians already at that time, even before MTV, were used to making videos because we, as I say, we only have about 24 million people, and in a space the size of the U.S. So you have to travel all the time. So you make videos for people to see you. So what was it like following then?
When did they come over to LA then, to Hollywood? Would that be about 83, 84? Because I'm thinking, or even later, because Kick was, what was it? Kick was 86. 86.
Yeah. But 88 was when it just exploded. They were on tour for a year and a half. They started coming over. Actually, Chris sent 3 members of the band. The 3 writing members at that time were Andrew, Kirk, and Michael. And he sent them over to stay with me. And he gave me a whole list of places, the Whiskey A Go-Go and all these places on Sunset that he had me take them to.
Right.
Just sort of feel things out, listen to the music. Then they were sent on to London, and they went back to Australia, and Michael and Andrew wrote like crazy. And that's when it just all started, and they set up this very small tour in the United States on the West Coast. The Go-Go's saw them. Their manager asked if they would join them as their what do you call it? The band that comes on?
The support act.
Yeah.
Or the opening act, if you like, yeah.
So that was the last time I believe they supported anyone.
And then, of course, world domination followed. Of course, these days, and I mean, as I said before, Kick was everywhere. These days, of course, we keep in contact with WhatsApp, social media, the whole thing. How difficult was it to keep in contact with Michael when he was going around the world being the rock star? And, and how much, how difficult was it to actually have a quiet word with him, I suppose?
No, we had faxes. Everybody had a fax machine.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, that was huge. So sometimes he'd just draw something funny and say, I miss you, or, and then gradually, and gradually they just got so big. I mean, actually, it wasn't even gradual, really. Once they were seen, and the swing came out, that was huge.
Yeah.
And, they... So it was just always phones then, and he'd send me the full book, the itinerary book, before he'd leave. So I always knew how to get a hold of him.
What's it like? It must be quite difficult because people have a public perception of Michael because of what they know of him via the media and via the music, and things get distorted. And there are several things that you have in the book that I didn't know about and show. I mean, I've often thought that Michael has been woefully misunderstood and people sort of make a caricature of him. And your book has actually gone to sort of reinforce that thing that Michael was misunderstood. I mean, he was only 37 when he left us.
Yeah. And that was very important to me. I mean, there have been at least 8 other books out there, my first one included. And but I feel so good about this one because I feel that it brings the real Michael to the fore. There are many, many things in it nobody has ever heard before, because there were some that he wrote in his diaries. Some I had a lot of people who spoke to me who couldn't speak before. I mean, first of all, Michael's death was such a shock to all his friends.
Sure.
They wouldn't speak. And I started writing. I didn't know that Richard Lowenstein was working on his Mystify at the time. I had done an interview for Richard. It was like a 3-hour interview years before. But then he called me and said he was working on this. So the two of us kind of worked a bit in tandem on that with things that we knew, that we found out and so forth.
And I mean, you've said that your brother roamed the world with a book in his hand and one in his suitcase, which is a lovely image. But is that what you're trying to get through, as the fact that he was? Because people have this view of him sort of being the classic rock and roll star on tour, but this wasn't the case.
Exactly. I mean, he was the one on the bus or on the plane who was reading a book, serious books. He tried everything, and as far as different authors were concerned, and he hated that people would think of him as a kind of a vacuous singer, just just up there gyrating or something, because he wasn't like that at all. He didn't do well in school, but he made up for it by being a voracious reader.
Do you think that, I mean, we talk about the media distorting couples. The media were particularly vitriolic when it came to Michael and Paula. And obviously, but the thing that seems to be overlooked is the fact that, they had a daughter, the splendidly named Heavily Heroni Tiger Lily. And you talk about that as well, about his love and his joy at having a daughter.
Yes. Yeah. He was always good with children. He was wonderful with my 2 children. And in fact, they're the only cousins who knew him. The others were born afterward. And so I always knew he would be. And my mother used to say to him, Michael, why don't you just find some lovely girl and get married? You'd be just great to have children. And he always said, but Mother, there are too many beautiful women in the world. And so he obviously wasn't, I don't think he was the marrying kind. But when Tiger Lily was born, certainly the fatherhood in him came out. He adored that child.
Also, there was the And it's secret. So the philanthropy, the East Timor story, which made me turn my head, because obviously it's secret. So until you've put this out there, very few people would have known about this.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, I wanted people to understand what they were reading by the regular press was not, they didn't know what he was doing. He was not the kind of man who would go out and say, he's given this much to Greenpeace, and he gave to Greenpeace and Amnesty all the time. And he did special things for them. They used his voice, his persona for things. And he would never do that. He would talk about it when we were sitting around the table. But he didn't make any of that public. And yes, he was very much for the Timorese, and he worked hard on that. He really did. He understood so much of what was going on in the world. He was so interested in politics. He really was, and knew so much about it. I mean, he'd start talking about some country and what was happening, and I would be so interested because he'd have all his facts down.
It would have been. Excuse me. It's very sad. It would have been interesting to see what Michael would have done in a digital age, in a social media age, in an age where people can be informed. Do you think he would have embraced where we are now in terms of music? Do you think he would have been active on the social media, on the climate change issue? Because by the sounds of it, those were pretty much his concerns anyway.
Oh, absolutely. He would have been right in there. I mean, he was talking about that long before he died. I mean, before people were talking about it in social media. He would, at dinner parties and just being around people, he would talk about the earth and what are we doing to it, and what are we doing to each other, and talking, and it was he who told me about the effects of what we're doing, say, in the United States, that affects people in other countries as far as the atmosphere and so forth. I mean, he was very much into things like that. And he would have been speaking out, yeah, for sure.
His death was a
little bit on the Bono side, maybe, going around, yeah.
How willing, obviously, you're his sister, so people perhaps were a little bit more willing to talk to you about their shock on his sudden death, and it was a shock. I mean, I remember literally sort of dropping my cuppa when I found out myself about it. Obviously, they told you how important he was to them.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are times I was screaming inside from my loss. And, but I felt it was important for people. They would show it. People hug me all the time. They just come up and hug me because they feel that they're a little bit closer to him. And I really feel it. And I understand their loss, of course. I mean, obviously it can't be, as I feel, as great as mine. This was like my third child, But I understand it, and I hug them right back. I appreciate it so much.
What do you hope that people will take from the book, and for Michael's legacy? I mean, he's always going to be a superstar in Australia. He represents so much. What do you hope that people will take, seeing beyond, the tabloid falsehoods and the real person beside? I mean, I said before, he's mystifying, but misunderstood, I would have said.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things. First of all, I certainly do want people from this book, I hope they can feel the kind of person that Michael was. They get a much better, more rounded picture of him. And that makes me happy, to reclaim what he deserves. But also,